Hi, this is Paul, and this is going to be an in-depth guide on how to use my custom scripts for the P1-M and V1-M from iCON in Studio One. The first thing to say is that you'll see down here it says Bitwig. This is definitely for Studio One. However, I've had to use the Bitwig profile. There's an explanation of why in the written documentation, so I won't go into that now. But this is definitely Studio One, but you must use the Bitwig profile. So the first thing to talk about is the shift. So as you can imagine, if you engage shift, then certain functions behave differently. There's two ways of engaging the shift. You can hold it down and it turns on, and then when you release it, it goes off. Alternatively, you can tap it to latch it on and tap it again to latch it off. The VPot presses do different things depending on which scene you're in. So there's a full explanation of the scenes coming up, but each scene has a different action for the VPots. However, one thing that's constant, no matter what scene mode you're in here, if you engage the shift and click on the potentiometer, then whatever the VPot is connected to will reset to its default value. So here in track mode, we're connected to the input gain on the channel. So you can see this one is -7.7. With shift mode engaged, if I click it, it resets to 0 again. If I engage the pan mode, and we look at here, this guitar 1 channel, and that's panned hard left at the moment. If we shift click it, it gets pushed back into the center default position. Similarly with the faders, anytime you want the faders return to the 0 position, so let's push this one down, we can engage shift and then tap on the fader and it goes back to 0. So let's have a look at the display now. We have 4 lines of text. The top 2 lines of text are to do with what the VPot is connected to. So here in track mode, the VPot is connected to the input gain. So we're seeing the readout of the input gain and we can see that changing. The second line is what it is we're connected to, and here it's showing the channel names or the track names, because in track mode all the VPots are connected to the same thing, which is the input gain, and in pan they're all connected to the pan position. So we're reading out the track names there. The bottom half of the screen, the lower two, are showing first of all the track number. This always shows the track number, and also the automation. You can see here we've got this one is in read, that one's in touch, read, and these have no automation. Their automation is off. So you can see if I go to the guitar 1, if I select that as the main channel, and then I press read, you can see it lights up in snare read mode. If I press read again, it turns off, and that's the off mode. And last, the bottom one here, in this particular scene, this is showing the level of the fader, so the track volume, essentially. This sometimes displays the track name if the track name is displaced from the top here. So sometimes the track name is at the top on basic scenes like track and pan, where all the VPots are connected to the same thing. But if the VPots are connected to different things, then this will tell you what the VPot's connected to, and the track name is then displayed on the very bottom. So I can demonstrate that on the cues mix. If I press the cues mix here, we can see that the track names have now jumped to the bottom here, because at the top we're showing which cue mix we're actually connected to. So next we'll talk about the select keys. The select buttons, regardless of what mode you're in, what scene you're in, they will always select the particular track that's displayed on the display. So one of the annoying things with the Mackie control script was that the console in Studio One didn't really follow along with your track selection on the controller. Now on my script, whenever you select a channel on the controller, the Studio One console will be scrolled so that the selected track becomes visible. So at the moment we're on the left-hand side of the Studio One console with the drums, and that currently is what's showing up on the controller. If I bank on the controller and we go further to the right of the project, and we want to select this piano track. Now at the moment, the piano track isn't visible in the Studio One console, but as soon as I press it, then the console now scrolls so that the piano is in view. And it tries to scroll it so that the selected track is in a similar position to what's on the controller. So we have the piano track, we have this VCA keys, and then we have 4 ARP channels. That's how it's set it up on the console here. So we've got the piano, which we've selected, and then to the right of it, we've got the VCA and then the 4 ARP channels. So it tries to scroll it into a similar position as to what it is on the controller. So what about the opposite way around now? We're here sort of in the middle of the console here, but let's go all the way back to, let's say, this hi-hat track here. And we select that, and maybe we are doing something on that. And now we want to bring that into view on the controller. What we could do is just start banking and trying to find it. But if we press the locate button here, then the controller is automatically banked to whatever bank contains the hi-hat. Here we're looking at channel 5, so it's obviously bank 1 because that contains tracks 1 to 8. If we go over a little bit more and let's pick the bass DI and locate that one, then the controller is banked to bank 2, which is channels 9 through 16, because the one we're interested in is number 10. So now we're going to talk about the markers mode. You engage the markers mode by clicking the button and it lights up. The jog wheel positions the cursor within the project still. And to place a marker, you can either press the record button or you can click the jog wheel. To move between markers, you can press the rewind to move to the previous marker, or forward to move to the next marker. And then to come out of marker mode again, just click it to turn it off. The master sections also work. So in the P1-M, it hasn't got a dedicated master section. You have to press this master button here. And now channel 8 is connected to the master output bus. And the metering, let's start playback again. The metering will also show whatever is on the master meter. Which brings us to the metering. So in normal metering mode, it shows the peak level on the particular channel. It has been rescaled from the Mackie control to make a lot more sense. In the Mackie control scripts, the 0 dB is somewhere in the middle of the orange section, which doesn't really make sense and does not particularly helpful. So I've rescaled the meters so that, well, you've got a couple of choices. The default is that 0 dB is right at the top of the orange section. So we can see that here in the written documentation. You can see 0 dB is right at the top of the orange section, and then minus 12 dB is at the top of the green section. And then anything over 0 dB is going to light the red overload light. Now, if you don't like gain staging everything to go under 0 dB, then you can opt in the user sections to use what I call the green mode, and that repositions it so that the 0 dB is now at the top of the green section, and then you have plus 8 dB of headroom in the orange section before the overload light comes on at plus 8 dB. If you have a stereo track assigned to the channel, then the meter, obviously there's only one meter, so it's going to show you the maximum of the left and the right channel. You can also put the meters into gain reduction mode, and you can do that by pressing the flip button. And you can see here we've got compressor on 2 channels. One is the drum room mic here, and you can see that that's doing around 3 dB of compression at its maximum. And then you've got the bass DI as well, which is doing a lot more. You can see here how the gain reduction meters work. It's 1 dB per pip until you get to minus 6 dB. and then you've got 9 right at the top of the green section. And then you can see that the orange section goes from 12 to 36, and then your red light comes on at minus 48. Now, on this script, the master section, if we activate that again, the master section also has metering here. On the V1-M, you have dedicated meters, and they display in stereo as well, whereas here, obviously, we've only got 1 meter on the P1-M, so that's just showing you the peak of the maximum of the peak of the left and the right. The jog wheel can be put into zoom mode. This works exactly just how the Mackie script works. If you hold down the up and down zoom button, then you can zoom in and out of your tracks vertically, and the same with horizontally. And the moving also works, so I can press the up and down here, and I can move up and down the tracks or the console. So now we come to the track filters, which are here on my display here on my touchscreen. This allows you to filter out what you're seeing on the control surface. So if I only want to see, for example, my VCA channels, if I hit that, then I'm only now seeing the VCAs on here. And similarly, I can change that to perhaps buses. There are all my buses. And then if I click it again, it goes off, and I'm looking at now everything. And this everything view is whatever is visible in the Studio One console. So if I hide tracks from here or show tracks from here, then that will be reflected on the control surface. There is one other one to talk about, and that is the remote bank, which is down here. Now, that remote bank is a user bank that you can set up if you press this little key here. And now, once that's activated, you can choose what is visible. You can use this to hide and show tracks, or you can use these buttons down here to filter by track types. So perhaps if you don't want the VCA showing, I can just turn those off. And so now I've only got audio tracks and buses, and that was my remote mode. I can turn that off, and I'll go back to the normal mode with the VCAs. So here I've got 2 VCAs showing, the drums and the bass, but if I engage remote mode, where I've filtered out the VCAs, then you can see they disappear. So that enables you to set up a sort of user scene, if you like, that you can switch in and out whenever you like. And you can have a mix and match of all sorts of different types, or any particular tracks that you want to put in there. So now we're going to talk about the scenes. There are 4 scenes here, and each of them configures the control surface to control different parameters within the DAW. Now, each scene also has a focus mode, which you can turn on and off by pressing this focus button down here. And when focus mode is engaged, the surface is only controlling parameters for one particular track. Without the focus mode engaged, then every single channel here is connected to one of the particular tracks in the DAW. So on the display here, on the third line, over to the right-hand side, you can see it displays the current scene name. So here's track. If we put it into pan mode, we've got pan appearing here. And if you focus the mode, then you've got the track focus mode here with the square brackets, means focus mode. And on the right-hand side, it tells you which track you're focused on. In this case, it's the piano track. Now, these are obviously overwriting the track number and the automation status. So if you don't want to see those, you can turn them off by pressing Scene Info. So that's turned off, and it's now showing you the track number and the automation status. So we're going to start with track mode, and we're going to be unfocused to start with. Now in track mode, the VPots here are connected to the input gain on the twist and the polarity on the press. And you can see on the display up here, on the top here, you can see what the input gain currently is. And if you change any of this, you can see the new reading. And if you press it, you can flip the polarity. You can see 1 is flipped and 0 is unflipped. The second row of the display shows the track name. The third row shows the track number and the automation status. And the fourth row shows the current fader value, which is connected to the volume on this particular scene. The other controls are exactly as you would expect. So arm for record, solo the track, and mute the track, and select it as the current track. If you press shift, this now becomes the monitor. So I can activate the monitoring without the recording. So the monitoring is now engaged, as you can see on the Studio One console. And because we're not in focus mode, every channel is controlling a different track in the DAW. So now we're going to look at the focus mode of the track. So we're going to select now the bass DI track, and then I'm going to press the focus mode. And you can see that now it's been put into track focus mode with the square brackets, and it's telling you which particular track we're looking at. This is the bass DI. From here, you can select another track. So if we want to focus in on the guitar 57, we can just select this track here by pressing the select underneath it. And now we're looking at guitar 57. We'll go back to the bass DI. So now all of these VPots are connected to different parameters for this particular track. And you can see what parameters they're connected to by looking at the big bold text. And above it is the value of that current parameter. So the input gain is now on this pot, so I can change that. I can flip the phase. That's the pan. The input channel, at the moment it's none, but if I want to connect this to an input channel, I can do input left or right channel here from my sound card. Similarly with the output, this controls what bus you're sending to. So I've got a bass bus here, but I've got other buses, percussion buses, etc. This one here bypasses all the sends. This won't do anything because there aren't any sends on this track, but you can just turn that to bypass them, or bypassing inserts as well. So if I do that, 1 means they're all bypassed. You can see there, that's the compressor, and you can see on the screen it bypassing them. Now, channel 1 controls the main controls on this track, so it will do the fader volume and also record, solo, and mute this particular track. If we press play, then we can see the metering happening here. Now, these 3 meters are all still on the same focus track, bass DI. But this is the left channel here. That's the right channel metering, which is separate. If we pan it, you can see, perhaps if I do this, you can see that we're now on the right side. And then that's more on the left side now. And this is your gain reduction here. So obviously I've got a compressor on this track, and that's doing a little bit of gain reduction there. Next, we're going to do the pan. This is very similar to the track view. Every single channel is connected to a particular track in the DAW, except for this time, the VPots are now connected to the pan, and you can move the pan with that. Otherwise, it's all the same. The metering is the peak metering, or you can press flip and see the gain reduction. The record, solo, and mute button will do exactly the same thing. Select always selects the track that is shown on the display. And the fader, of course, is on the volume. Right, we're now going to look at the pan focus mode. So we'll press focus to put it in focus mode. And here we're looking at the pan focus on the piano. Each VPot is now connected to a different parameter. You can see here, there's only a couple at the moment. You've got the pan type and the actual pan, so you can change the panning here. If you want to change the panning type, you can click with this VPot. And then, so now I've put it into dual panning mode, so you can control the left and the right separately. Channel 1 in the focus mode does the normal channel things with the volume, record arm, solo, and mute. And the metering again, is exactly the same as the track focus metering, which is the left channel, the right channel, and the gain reduction. So here we are in the send mode, and we can see send seen here, and it's not focused because it's got stars, and then it's showing you 1 of 3. So get to that in a minute. So what this scene is showing you is every single channel, again, is because it's not focused, is connected to an individual track. Now those tracks may or may not have sends assigned to them. So we can see here that we do have sends in these 4 here. So we got on slot 1, we've got room, plate, and delay, and that's exactly what we're seeing here on the surface. We've got room, plate, and delay. So it's showing us, for these particular tracks, what's in slot 1 of the send slots. And you can see that that's here 1 of 3. So in this project, we have a maximum of 3 slots being used, and now we're looking at slot 1 for each of these channels. Now, as you can see here on the project, these two also have 2 slots, and they have a delay underneath here. So when we press this send again, it's going to advance to that next slot. So now we're looking at slot 2, and now we can see delay and delay here. Now these 2 channels don't have anything in slot 1, so they've been disconnected. And then if we press send again to go to the 3rd slot, none of the channels that we're seeing at the moment have a send in slot 3, so they've all been disconnected. And then pressing send again returns you back to 1. So when the channel is connected, the display shows you which particular send you're being routed to, and then the particular level of that send. Now the level is controlled by the fader. This, as you can see, this controls the level that's being sent out to the room here. Now the pan pots are connected to the panning. It's possible to pan the sends in a different way than the channel is being panned. However, you have to unlock the pan first, because normally the pan is locked, and you can see, and the record button here is showing you the pan lock status. So these 2 channels here, the pan is locked. So if I try and change the panning of this particular send, you'll see it comes up and says locked. So I have to unlock that first by pressing the record button. That's unlocked the panning now, and now I can change the panning of that send independent from the panning of the channel. If I don't want that anymore and I just want to go back to following the panning of the channel, I can just relock it by pressing the record button. Now the solo button here switches between pre-fader and post-fader. Normally it's post-fader, but if you want it pre-fader, you can press the solo button and it lights up in green, and now this is controlling the send pre-fader. Press it again to turn that off and it's back to post-fader. The mute does what you expect. It mutes that particular send so that it will no longer be sending on that channel. Now you can also change which bus you're routing to here on this send. So at the moment we're going to the room reverb. If you want to change that, you can click down on the VPot, and now it goes into route mode. And now when you twist the VPot, it'll change which is the send destination. So we want to change from room to the plate reverb. We can just change to plate, and then we can click it again, and then now we're sending to the plate reverb instead. So now we're going to look at the send focus mode. So put it into focus mode, and you can see here it says sends and with square brackets meaning focus mode, and we're focused in on guitar 2 channel. And you can see from the screen that guitar 2 has 2 sends, and in the focus mode we're now seeing all of the sends for this particular channel. So these 2 strips are now active, and now we're looking at just the sends for this particular channel. So in the focus mode, each channel is connected to a particular send, and each channel does exactly the same thing as the non-focus mode. So the send level is controlled by the fader, and this locks your panning. Solo puts you into pre-fader or post-fader mode, and mute will prevent the send being sent. So we're now in Q mode and it's not focused because we've got stars there. And each individual channel is connected to a different track in the DAW. Like the sends, it'll also show you how many Q slots are available. In this project, I've got 2 Q slots available. And we're currently looking at the first slot, which goes to the vocal send. And if I press Q again, we can advance to the second one, which I've called the band send. Now on each channel, the fader controls the volume that's going out to that particular cue. Now normally it follows the channel volume, and so it'll be locked to the channel volume, and that's indicated here by the solos. So if it's green, it's locked to the channel volume. If you want to change it, you can just unlock it, or also you can just push the fader and it will automatically unlock it for you. And now we're sending independently from the channel volume, so you can make your own cue mix here for the vocalist just by changing these faders. If you want to go back to having it set up so that the output volume follows the channel volume, you can just click the solo buttons and it goes back into being locked to the channel volume, and you can see that the fader returns to that position. Now what should happen on the VPots is that this should control the panning. It doesn't, and that's because of a bug in Studio One. Unfortunately, they haven't exposed the panning to external controllers. There's just no way to connect it up. So unfortunately, that doesn't work. The pan lock, like the sends, is on the record button. This does work, but it's not particularly useful if you can't actually change the panning, but it is included there anyway. The mute does exactly what you would expect. It mutes that particular channel from being sent to that cue mix. And now we're going to go on to the focus mode of the cue. So we're now in cue focus mode with the square brackets, and the track we're focused on is guitar 2. And this time each individual channel is connected to one particular cue mix slot. So however many you have will be spilled out across the surface, and each individual channel does exactly the same thing as when you're not in focus mode. So the fader controls the volume being sent to that cue mix, and the solo button turns on and off the locking to the channel volume. So you can restore it to the channel volume by pressing the solo button. Mute stops that channel being sent to that particular cue mix. Next, we'll look at the plugin scene. The plugin scene works in a similar way to the sends and cue mix scenes. So when not focused, each channel is connected to a different track, and the controls are connected to the normal track parameters, so volume, solo, mute, etc. However, on the display, you now get shown which plugins are inserted onto these tracks. The current slot number is indicated over here, and we're looking at slot number 1 at the moment, and there's a total of 5 slots in use on this song. And if I press the plugin button, it cycles through each plugin slot. If you click on the rotary encoder underneath the plugin name, it will open up the editor in Studio One, and the control surface is now put into plugin control mode, and this is going to be discussed in depth in a later chapter. We'll now look at the plugin focused mode. So enabling the focus mode, we'll focus in on the selected channel, which at the moment is this bass R101 channel here. Like the other focus modes, the first channel strip controls the focus channel, but now the display is showing all of the plugins that are inserted onto this particular track. And again, clicking one of the rotary encoders underneath the plugin will bring that plugin editor up in Studio One, and now the control surface is put into plugin control mode, which we will now look at in the next section. So when the controller is set to the plugin scene, and you've got a plugin editor open in Studio One, then the surface gets put into plugin control mode. Before a plugin can be controlled in this way, you have to map the controls to the plugin parameters just like any other MIDI device. But before we get to that, I'm going to explain this lower line on the display here. So the first cell here shows you the track that you're working on at the moment. The third cell here shows you what plugin you have open at the moment. We've got the compressor open. And to the left and right of the plugin name are arrows allowing you to navigate through the list of plugins on this track. So if you just click the rotary encoder underneath that right arrow, that will step through to the right. So we'll be looking at the de-esser, and then to the rotor. And then if you can't go any further, there's no arrow shows up. So on the surface, you can connect any of the rotor encoders to a parameter in the plugin, and also any of the faders and any of these select buttons. Now, you have 8 pages available, and each page has its own separate mapping of the controls. So on each page, you can map 24 controls, and you have 8 pages, so that's a total of 192 controls that can be mapped for each individual plugin. And to switch between pages, you use the arrows like that. Finally, on the last cell, you have the close button, and that will close the current editor, and it will put you back into the normal plugin scene. So we're now going to look at how to map a plugin. I'm going to map this Fat Channel plugin here, which doesn't have any mappings at the moment. So I'm going to open it by clicking the VPot. And as you can see, everything's reset, and there's nothing displayed up in the display here because there's no parameters connected yet. So the idea here is that I'm going to connect the first page to the equalizer section of the Fat Channel, and then on page 2, I'm going to connect the compressor controls. Now, before you do any mapping, you have to come here and press this Edit Mapping button, this little cog, and it drops down the mapping section here. So you can obviously map the controls in any way that makes sense to you, but for this demonstration, I'm going to map the equalizer across this whole surface. And the way I'm going to do that is that the fader is going to be the gain. The select buttons are going to be turning the individual bands on and off. And the rotary encoders are going to be setting the frequency. And then the fader to the right of it I'll use for the cue. So I'm going to start by mapping the low frequency band. And the first thing we'll do is we'll put the frequency on this top encoder on channel 1 here. And to do that, you simply move the control that you want to map. And as you can see here on the right-hand side of the mapping window, we have VPot 1/1, and that means that I've moved the VPot on channel 1, and we're currently on page 1. And then the next thing you have to do is move the parameter on the plugin interface. So it's the frequency I want to control. So I just move that, and now that comes up on the left-hand side. And then to link them, I just press this arrow in between, and they're now linked. Now, as you can see on the display, it now puts the name of the parameter up here, low frequency, and the display will go in order that they appear on the channel strip. So the VPot is at the top, the second row is going to be used for the fader, and then finally the select button will appear on line 3. So if I move that now, you can see that is actually linked. So now I'll do the same with the fader. So we just move the fader, we then move the gain, and then I press the link. And there we go, that's low gain now. And then to turn this band on and off, I'm going to use the select button. So I press the select button, I turn the band on, and then I link it. And as you can see, the select button is going to be lit when the thing is on and off when the parameter is off. And finally, we'll put the cue on this VPot. So I move it, I move the cue, and then I link it. And you can see that now says low cue. So you can see exactly what all of these controls are going to be doing. And you may have noticed that when I move the controls, then the name is replaced by the value. And then after a while, it goes back to the name. So I'm now going to link up the rest of them. I'll fast forward through this. So now they're all mapped. I can easily turn a band on, give it a bit of a boost, find the frequency, and set the cue. So now we'll map some parameters on the compressor. And for this, I've kind of run out of room here, so I'm just going to use page 2. So I'm going to switch to page 2. And now I get a completely new mapping for this. So now I'm free to maybe have the threshold on this fader. And maybe turn the compressor on and off with this select button. And have the ratio on this knob here. You get the idea. You just map it however makes sense to you. And then it's easy to switch between pages to go from the EQ to the compressor. And you could set up more pages, maybe for the limiter and the gate, etc. So you only need to do this mapping once for any plugin you want to use. And any time from now on I insert the fat channel, then I'm going to get this particular mapping up, and that also goes for any future songs or projects that I make. So these 3 buttons on channel 1 have a specific function when you're in the plugin mode. They will mute and solo the current track that you're working on. And the record button here on channel 1 will bypass the current plugin that you're using.